In the quiet coastal town of Millbrook, nestled along Cornwall's rugged shoreline, Emma Wilson stood at the edge of her small cottage, watching the restless sea. The morning mist rolled in, soft and heavy, like a blanket of memories. At 32, she carried the weight of her past more heavily than most. Her father had been a fisherman, spending decades navigating the treacherous waters that now seemed to change with each passing season. When he died 2 years ago, he left behind more than just memories. He left Emma with a mission. The sea that had been his life had become her purpose. Every morning, Emma would collect her worn notebook, a pair of binoculars, and a simple water-resistant camera. Her research wasn't backed by big universities or fancy grants. It was a labor of love, a promise to her father's memory. She tracked the subtle changes in marine life, the shifting coastline, and the delicate balance of the ecosystem that had sustained her community for generations. The locals viewed her work with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Millbrook was a traditional place where fishing and farming had been the lifeblood for centuries. Climate change was a distant concept for many, something talked about on television but not truly understood. Emma's cottage was small but neat. Photographs of her father hung on the walls, images of a strong man standing on his fishing boat, weathered hands gripping the wheel, eyes looking out to the horizon. She had inherited those eyes, sharp, observant, always looking for something more. Her days were a careful balance of part-time teaching at the local school and her environmental research. Money was tight. Some months, she could barely pay her electricity bill. But Emma never complained. She believed in something bigger than her own struggles. One particularly cold morning, as she walked along the rocky beach, she noticed something different. A cluster of rock pools seemed smaller, the marine life less abundant. She carefully photographed and documented her observations, her fingers trembling slightly from the cold. The local fishermen would stop and chat with her occasionally. Old Tom, who had known her father for years, would shake his head. "Your dad would be proud," he'd say, offering her a warm cup of tea from his thermos. These moments kept her going, small connections that reminded her she wasn't alone in her mission. At the local community center, Emma would sometimes give presentations about her research. Most people would listen politely, but few truly understood the significance of her work. She spoke about changing water temperatures, shifting marine ecosystems, and the delicate balance of life along the coast. Her tiny living room was a testament to her passion. Maps covered the walls, charts and graphs filled every available surface. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of scientific journals and environmental studies. This was more than just a job for Emma. It was a calling. The winter was particularly harsh that year. Emma would wrap herself in her father's old fishing jacket, a piece of clothing that carried memories of warmth and protection. She would walk the coastline, recording, observing, understanding. Her laptop was old, her research equipment basic, but her determination was extraordinary. She knew that change didn't happen overnight. It happened through persistence, through small observations, through love for the place she called home. The town of Millbrook watched her. Some saw her as an eccentric, others as a passionate researcher. But nobody could deny the commitment in her eyes. She was her father's daughter, stubborn, passionate, deeply connected to the sea. As the day would fade and the sun would set over the Cornwall coast, Emma would sit on her small porch. She would review her notes, plan her next day's research, and think about the promise she had made to her father. The sea was changing and she was going to understand why. Her research might seem small to some, but Emma knew that every great change started with a single observation, a single moment of understanding. And she was ready to be that moment for Millbrook, for her community, for the world. The sea continued to roll, wave after wave, a constant reminder of the changes happening beneath its surface. And Emma Wilson continued to watch, to record, to hope. The community center buzzed with quiet energy on that crisp autumn morning. Local farmers, fishermen, and a handful of researchers gathered for what seemed like just another monthly meeting. Emma Wilson sat in the back, her worn notebook clutched tightly. expecting another routine discussion about local resources. Jack Thompson entered the room, a retired Navy officer with weathered hands and eyes that had seen more of the world than most in Millbrook. At 65, he moved with a deliberate grace, carrying a worn leather folder that looked like it had traveled across countless oceans. During a break in the meeting, Jack approached Emma. "You're David Wilson's daughter, aren't you?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Emma nodded, surprised he remembered her father. Jack pulled out a collection of old navigation logs, documents that had been carefully preserved for decades. "These might interest you," he said, spreading the papers. On a nearby table, the logs contained detailed observations of coastal changes, maritime conditions, and subtle shifts in marine environments that dated back 30 years. Emma's eyes widened. This was exactly the kind of historical data she had been searching, for their conversation began quietly, but soon became animated. Jack shared stories of his years at sea, how the coastline had changed, how fishing patterns had shifted, how the ocean seemed to be telling a story that few were listening to. Emma listened intently, her notebook filling with notes, her heart racing with excitement. The other community members watched curiously. In a small town like Millbrook, unexpected connections were rare but powerful. Jack and Emma represented two generations united by a deep love for the sea and a commitment to understanding its mysteries. Over the next few weeks, their collaboration grew. Jack would visit Emma's small cottage, bringing more documents, sharing more stories. They began mapping ecological patterns, comparing historical data with Emma's current research. It was more than just scientific work. It was a bridge between past and present. The local fishermen started to take notice. When they heard Jack and Emma discussing their findings, they would gather around, sharing their own observations. Old Tom, who had sailed these waters for decades, would nod and add his own stories. Slowly, a community effort began to take shape. Emma discovered that collective knowledge was far more powerful than individual research. Each person brought a piece of the puzzle: the fisherman's practical experience, the farmer's understanding of local ecosystems, Jack's historical perspective, and her scientific approach. They organized small workshops inviting community members to share their observations. People who had never considered themselves researchers suddenly became contributors. They brought old photographs, shared family stories, documented changes they had witnessed over generations. Jack became more than just a collaborator. He became a mentor, a friend. He understood Emma's passion in a way few others did. "Your father would be proud," he would say, which always brought a smile to Emma's face. Their work began to attract attention beyond Millbrook. A local environmental journal published their initial findings, highlighting the power of community-based research. Suddenly, Emma's small research project was becoming something more significant. The community center, once a place of routine meetings, transformed. It became a hub of environmental understanding, a place where local knowledge met scientific research. Emma and Jack had created something special, a bridge between traditional wisdom and modern scientific approach. Funding remained a challenge, but now Emma wasn't alone. The entire community seemed to be supporting her work. Local businesses began to contribute, offering small grants and resources. The town that once viewed her as an outsider now saw her as an important part of their collective future. As winter approached, Emma and Jack continued their work. Their collaboration was more than just research. It was a testament to the power of human connection, of listening, of understanding. They were writing a new story about Millbrook, about the sea, about hope. The ocean continued to roll outside, unchanged yet constantly changing. And in a small cottage in Cornwall, two people from different generations were working together to understand its secrets, one observation at a time. The local council meeting room felt cold and unwelcoming. Emma Wilson stood before a group of bureaucrats, her research documents spread across the old wooden table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. She had been fighting for months to get her environmental research taken seriously. "These changes aren't just numbers," she explained, pointing to a series of graphs showing coastal transformations. The council members exchanged disinterested glances. Mr. Peterson, the senior council member, cleared his throat. "Miss Wilson, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but this seems speculative." But Emma wasn't going to give up. She had learned persistence from her father, from years of struggling along the Cornwall coast. She knew that true change never came easily. The turning point came unexpectedly. A group of local school children attended the council meeting as part of a civic education program. They listened intently to Emma's presentation, their young eyes wide with curiosity. During the question time, a 12-year-old named Peter raised his hand. "Why are these changes important?" he asked. His simple question cut through the bureaucratic noise. Emma knelt down, her eyes level with the children. She explained how the changing coastline affected their community, how it impacted fishing, farming, and their entire way of life. She spoke about preservation, about understanding, about hope. Something shifted in the room. The council members who had been dismissive now listened more carefully. The children's enthusiasm was infectious. They began asking questions, showing genuine interest in environmental research. Over the next few weeks, Emma started organizing workshops at the local school. She transformed complex scientific concepts into engaging, understandable lessons. The children learned about marine ecosystems, climate patterns, and the importance of local environmental research. Jack Thompson supported her efforts, bringing his decades of maritime experience to the classroom. Together, they created a bridge between traditional knowledge and modern scientific understanding. The students were fascinated by his stories of how the sea had changed over the years. The school's headmaster, Mr. Williams, was initially skeptical, but as he saw the children's growing enthusiasm, he became a supporter. The school began incorporating environmental studies into their curriculum. What started as a small initiative was becoming a community-wide movement. Local businesses started to take notice. The fishing community, traditionally resistant to change, began to understand the importance of Emma's research. They realized that understanding environmental changes could help them adapt and survive. Emma's approach was never confrontational. She believed in education, in showing people the beauty and importance of their local ecosystem. Her workshops combined scientific data with personal stories, making complex concepts accessible. The local newspaper ran a feature about her work. "Local researcher transforms community understanding," the headline read. People who had previously ignored her work now stopped her on the street to ask questions. Children became her greatest allies. They would bring her interesting observations, a strange rock formation, an unusual marine creature, changes in local wildlife. What had started as a solitary research project was now a community-wide effort. Jack helped Emma develop a more structured approach. They created a simple reporting system where community members could share their observations. Old fishermen, farmers, and school children became citizen scientists, contributing to a growing understanding of their local environment. The council, which had initially dismissed Emma, now invited her to present at community meetings. Her persistence had broken through their bureaucratic barriers. They began to see her not as a troublemaker, but as a valuable community resource. Funding remained a challenge, but now Emma wasn't alone. The entire community seemed to support her work. Local businesses contributed small grants, and the school provided resources for her workshops. As spring approached, Emma realized something profound had changed. It wasn't just about her research anymore. It was about a community coming together, understanding their environment and preparing for the future. The sea continued to roll outside Millbrook, unchanged yet constantly changing. But now, an entire community was watching, learning, and understanding. Emma's journey from a solitary researcher to a community leader was complete. Her father would have been proud. Emma Wilson stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. Another rejection letter. Another missed opportunity. Financial struggles had been her constant companion for years, but this felt different. The Regional Environmental Research Grant, her last hope for supporting her work, had slipped away. Winter. In Millbrook was harsh that year. The wind howled around her small cottage, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. Bills piled up on the kitchen table. Her teaching hours had been cut, and her research funding was almost non-existent. Some nights she wondered if she could continue. Jack Thompson found her during one of her lowest moments. He arrived unexpectedly, bringing a warm thermos of soup and a weathered envelope. "Don't give up," he said simply, placing the envelope on her table. Inside was a small but meaningful grant from a local community development fund. It wasn't much, just enough to keep her research going for a few more months. But the accompanying letter told a different story. The fund had been inspired by her work with local schools, her commitment to community education. Emma realized then that her journey was about more than just scientific research. It was about hope, about showing people that one person could make a difference. Instead of using the money for herself, she made a decision that would change everything. She used the grant to support community environmental projects. She helped local fishermen understand changing marine patterns. She provided resources for school environmental programs. Her approach was simple but powerful. She didn't just collect data, she shared knowledge. She transformed her research into something that directly helped her community. Local farmers learned about sustainable practices. Fishermen gained insights into changing marine ecosystems. The community began to see her differently. She was no longer just a researcher with wild ideas. She was someone who genuinely cared, who was working to protect their way of life. Personal challenges mounted. Her cottage needed repairs. Her old car broke down. Some nights, she could barely afford heating, but her spirit remained unbroken. Each challenge became another opportunity to demonstrate resilience. Local businesses started to take notice. The bakery would offer her free bread. The hardware store gave her discounts on supplies. The community was slowly becoming her support system. Her workshops at the school became more popular. Children would bring their parents to learn about environmental changes. What started as a small initiative was becoming a community movement. Jack continued to be her mentor and friend. He would often remind her of her father's words, "True change comes from persistence, not perfection." Emma held on to those words. During her darkest moments, one particularly difficult month, she considered giving up. The financial pressure was overwhelming. But then something unexpected happened. A group of her students organized a community fundraiser. They sold handmade crafts, organized a community cleanup, and raised money to support her research. The amount wasn't large, but its significance was enormous. These children understood the value of her work. They saw hope where others saw only challenges. Emma's personal transformation wasn't about financial success. It was about finding purpose, about understanding that true impact comes from dedication, not resources. She learned to see her limitations as opportunities, her challenges as chances to grow. Her tiny cottage became more than just a home. It became a research center, a meeting place, a symbol of hope for the community. Walls covered with maps, shelves filled with research documents, windows overlooking the changing coastline. As spring approached, Emma reflected on her journey. She had started as a lonely researcher, struggling to be heard. Now she was a vital part of her community's understanding of their environment. The sea outside continued its endless dance. Waves rolled in, telling stories of change, of persistence, of hope. And Emma Wilson stood watching, ready to listen, ready to understand, ready to make a difference. Her father's memory lived on in every research paper, every workshop, every moment of determination. She was no longer just surviving. She was truly living her purpose. 5 years had passed since Emma Wilson first began her environmental research in Millbrook. The small coastal town had transformed in ways nobody could have imagined. The community adaptation plan she had developed was now a model for other coastal communities across Cornwall. What had started as a personal mission had become something much larger, a testament to collective hope and determination. On a crisp autumn morning, Emma stood at the community center, surrounded by the people who had supported her journey. Representatives from neighboring towns had come to learn about Millbrook's remarkable transformation. Jack Thompson sat in the front row, his eyes filled with pride. The changes were visible everywhere. Local fishermen had adapted their practices based on the marine ecosystem research. New sustainable fishing techniques protected marine life while ensuring the community's economic survival. The school's environmental program had become a national model, with students actively participating in local conservation efforts. Green jobs had emerged from their research. Local businesses had started developing eco-friendly technologies. The town's economy, once struggling, now thrived on sustainable practices. Young people who might have left for big cities were now returning, inspired by the community's innovative approach. Emma remembered her father. Every achievement felt like a tribute to his memory. The sea that had been his life was now the foundation of the community's future. She could almost hear his voice saying, "You did it, sweetheart." The Regional Environmental Conference invited her to present Millbrook's success story. Scientists and community leaders from across the country listened intently. Emma spoke not with technical jargon, but with genuine passion. She explained how community involvement was the real key to environmental adaptation. Jack stood beside her, a living connection to the town's maritime history. Together, they represented the bridge between traditional knowledge and modern scientific understanding. Their partnership had become a symbol of intergenerational collaboration. Local schools had completely transformed their curriculum. Children now learned about environmental science not as a distant concept, but as a living, breathing reality. They understood their connection to the ecosystem, their responsibility to protect it. The coastal landscape itself showed signs of recovery. Marine life was returning to areas that had been struggling. Careful documentation and community-led conservation efforts had made a real difference. Emma's research had proven that local action could create global impact. Funding was no longer a struggle. The success of Millbrook's approach had attracted national grants and recognition. But Emma remained humble. She knew the real wealth was in the community's spirit, not in monetary support. Her tiny cottage remained the heart of her research, but now it was more than just a personal workspace. It had become a community resource, a place where local residents could learn, share, and understand their environment. The town celebrated her achievements, but Emma always redirected the praise. "This isn't my success," she would say. "This is our success." Every person in Millbrook contributed. Jack would often remind her of how far they had come, from a single passionate researcher facing skepticism to a community-wide movement of environmental understanding. Their journey proved that change was possible, that hope was powerful. Young researchers now sought her guidance. Universities invited her to share Millbrook's model. But Emma remained committed to her community. Her work was never about personal recognition, but about creating real, meaningful change. As the sun set over Millbrook, casting golden light across the transformed coastline, Emma reflected on her journey. She had started with a promise to her father, a commitment to understand and protect their local ecosystem. What had begun as a personal mission had become a beacon of hope, not just for Millbrook but for coastal communities everywhere. She had proven that one person's determination, combined with community support, could create extraordinary change. The sea continued its eternal rhythm outside. Waves rolled in, telling stories of resilience, of hope, of transformation. And Emma Wilson stood watching, knowing that their journey was far from over. It was just beginning. Her father's spirit lived on in every wave, every research paper, every moment of community collaboration. Millbrook was no longer just a small coastal town. It was a testament to what was possible when people came together with hope and determination.